For 6 weeks, Malia Carter brought breakfast to an old man every single morning. Warm chai, samosas, and fresh fruit. 7 a.m. without fail at the same bench outside Carter Technologies. She was 30, black, a self-made billionaire worth $1.2 billion. He was elderly, Indian, homeless, speaking a language nobody could understand. Then one Tuesday morning in December, everything changed. 2 men in tailored suits appeared at her executive office door. Government IDs. Stone-faced expressions. One from the Indian consulate. One from the U.S. State Department. When Malia's assistant buzzed them through, still clutching her morning espresso, her stomach tightened. "Ms. Carter," the Indian official said, his voice formal and urgent. "We're here about Rodman Wood." Rodman. Her voice caught. The old man from the bench. The State Department official's expression was grave. "Ma'am, we need to talk about what you've been doing for him." If you're enjoying this story of unexpected compassion, subscribe to see how a simple act of kindness changed 2 lives and triggered an international incident. 6 weeks earlier, Malia had noticed Rodman for the first time on a cold November morning. She walked to work most days, a habit from her early years building Carter Technologies from a studio apartment. The bench was 2 blocks from her headquarters, right outside a shuttered bookstore that had closed during the pandemic. That's where he sat, wrapped in a thin gray blanket, clutching a weathered leather bag to his chest like it held something precious. He was speaking rapidly, his words flowing in a language she didn't recognize, urgent, desperate, incomprehensible. His long gray beard caught the morning frost. His eyes were sharp, alert, scanning each passing face as if searching for someone who might understand. Most people walked past without looking. Some crossed the street entirely, pretending he didn't exist. A few dropped coins in a paper cup without making eye contact. Malia had done the same thing for 3 days, telling herself she didn't have time to stop. She had board meetings, investor calls, product launches. Her calendar was blocked in 15-minute increments from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. But on the 4th morning, a Thursday in mid-November, she'd stopped at the cafe on the corner for her usual order. On impulse, she added items she never ordered for herself. Masala chai. A bag of samosas. An apple and a banana. Subscribe to discover what happened when a billionaire stopped to see what everyone else ignored. Rodman was awake when she approached, his eyes tracking her movement across the sidewalk. He watched her carefully, the way someone watches when they've learned to expect rejection. Or worse. "Excuse me," Malia said, holding out the paper bag. The chai steamed in the cold morning air. "I thought you might be hungry." He stared at the offering, then at her face, then back at the food. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then his hands, weathered, trembling slightly from the cold, reached out and took the bag with both palms, cradling it like something sacred. He spoke rapidly in what she would later learn was Hindi mixed with Punjabi dialect. His tone carried profound gratitude, desperate urgency, and something else, a plea to communicate something vital. He gestured emphatically, pointing at himself, then at papers visible inside his leather bag, then back at her, his eyes wide with hope and frustration. Malia couldn't understand a single word, but she recognized the universal language of a man trying desperately to be heard. She smiled gently, the way you smile at someone you want to comfort. "It's okay," she said softly. "You don't have to explain. Just stay warm." He nodded, but his expression collapsed slightly, disappointment mixed with gratitude. He tried to tell her something important. She hadn't understood. The moment passed. Malia checked her watch. 7:15. She'd be late for her 7:30 strategy meeting. "I have to go," she said. "But I'll see you tomorrow." "Okay." She didn't know why she said it. The words came out before she'd decided. Rodman's face transformed. He pressed his palms together in front of his chest, "Namaste," and spoke again, this time with what sounded like a blessing she couldn't translate. The next morning, she brought breakfast again. Chai, samosas, fruit. He was already awake, already waiting, his eyes brightening when he saw her crossing the street. And the morning after that. By the end of the first week, it had become a routine she couldn't imagine breaking. 7 a.m., every single day. Rodman was always there, always waiting at the same bench with that weathered leather bag clutched to his chest. He never let it go. Not once. They couldn't speak each other's language, but they communicated through gestures, through smiles, through the simple act of showing up. She would hand him the bag. He would press his palms together. She would nod. He would gesture as if telling a story she couldn't understand, pointing at his bag, at the skyscrapers around them, at her, at himself, a pantomime of something urgent and important that lived just beyond the language barrier. Sometimes other early morning commuters would stare. A few recognized her. Manhattan's tech scene wasn't that large, and a black woman billionaire under 35 made headlines. She could see the questions in their eyes. Why is she talking to him? What's she doing? She never explained. It wasn't their business. What happened next would prove that some encounters change everything. Subscribe to see the moment everything unraveled. One morning in early December, a man in an expensive overcoat walked past and muttered loud enough for both of them to hear, probably just going to spend it on drugs. Malia spun around, her voice sharp and clear. "Excuse me." The man didn't stop walking. "Just saying what everyone's thinking." "No," Malia called after him. "You're saying what cruel people think to justify walking past someone suffering." The man kept walking. Rodman sat quietly, his eyes downcast, his hands folded over the bag in his lap. When Malia turned back to him, she saw his shoulders were shaking. Not from cold. She sat down on the bench beside him, something she'd never done before. Her designer coat touched his thin blanket. Her perfume mixed with the street smell of the city. "You're not invisible," she said quietly, even though she knew he couldn't understand the words. "Not to me." Rodman looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, sad, knowing, heartbreaking. He spoke in his language, and though she couldn't translate, she understood the meaning. "Thank you." He reached into his bag, that mysterious leather bag he never let go, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. His hands shook as he showed it to her. It was covered in numbers, official-looking stamps, signatures she couldn't read. He pointed at the paper, then at her, then at himself, then at the buildings surrounding them. She thought he was showing her something from his past. Maybe identification from his home country. Maybe proof of who he used to be before ending up on this bench. "I see you," she said softly. She didn't know, couldn't have known, that he was trying to show her a $2.8 billion infrastructure deal. That the numbers on that paper represented the authorization codes for one of the largest international trade agreements in modern history. That the leather bag she assumed held his only possessions actually contained documents two governments were desperately searching for. She just thought he wanted to be seen as human. So she kept bringing breakfast. Every morning. 7 a.m. chai, samosas, fruit. She had no idea that every morning, Rodman was telling her, in words she couldn't understand, that he would repay her kindness 1,000 times over. That he would change her life. That she'd already changed his. Subscribe now, the next part of this story will leave you speechless. Malia had noticed Rodman for the first time on a cold November morning. The bench was 2 blocks from Carter Technologies headquarters, right outside a shuttered bookstore that had closed during the pandemic. That's where he sat, wrapped in a thin blanket despite the freezing temperature, clutching a weathered leather bag like his life depended on it. He was speaking rapidly in a language she didn't recognize, his voice carrying across the empty street as early morning commuters hurried past. Most people walked past without looking, their eyes fixed on their phones or straight ahead. Some crossed the street entirely, taking the long way around to avoid any interaction. Malia had almost done the same thing for 3 straight days. She was running late for a conference call with Tokyo investors, her mind already calculating revenue projections and market penetration strategies for the Asian market. But something made her glance back over her shoulder. The way he clutched that bag with both hands, even while gesturing wildly with his words. The desperate urgency in his voice as he called out to passing strangers who pretended not to hear. The complete and total invisibility the world had assigned him, as if he were part of the bench itself rather than a human being. She'd built a billion-dollar empire by seeing opportunities others missed, by recognizing value where others saw nothing. Maybe that instinct extended beyond balance sheets and profit margins. Maybe it extended to people too. She'd stopped at a cafe that morning, ordering her usual green tea and a protein bar for the walk. On impulse, something she couldn't quite explain even to herself, she added chai and a bag of fresh samosas to her order. The barista looked at her curiously. Malia never ordered chai. Never ordered samosas. She was a creature of rigid habit, the same order every single morning for 3 years. But today felt different somehow. Rodman was awake when she approached, his eyes sharp and alert despite his circumstances. He watched her carefully, tracking her movement across the sidewalk like he expected rejection or worse. Like he'd learned to read body language before people got close enough to hurt him. "Excuse me," Malia said, holding out the paper bag. The chai steamed in the cold morning air, creating small clouds between them. "I thought you might be hungry." He stared at the offering, then at her face, and something shifted in his expression. Surprise. Confusion. Hope. His weathered hands trembled as they reached for the bag, taking it with both palms like it was something precious and fragile. He spoke rapidly in Hindi, gesturing with one hand while clutching the food with the other. The words poured out in a torrent, urgent, grateful, desperate to communicate something vital. Malia caught the tone, if not the meaning. This wasn't just gratitude. This was a man trying to tell her something important, something that seemed to carry the weight of his entire existence. If you're wondering what he was really trying to say, subscribe now. What comes next will shock you. Rodman took the food with trembling hands and spoke rapidly in what sounded like Hindi mixed with another dialect, Punjabi perhaps, or something regional she couldn't identify. Malia couldn't understand a single word, but his tone carried layers of meaning, gratitude certainly, but also urgency and something else, desperation to communicate something important. He gestured emphatically with his free hand, pointing at himself, then at papers visible inside his bag, then back at her, then at the towering skyscrapers surrounding them. His eyes were pleading, begging her to understand something crucial. She smiled gently, the way you smile at someone you want to comfort but can't quite reach. "It's okay," she said softly. "You don't have to explain anything. Just stay warm, okay?" But Rodman's expression collapsed like a building losing its foundation. Disappointment flickered across his weathered face even as he pressed his palms together in namaste, a gesture of respect and gratitude. He tried to tell her who he was, Rodman Wood, Chief Investment Officer, here to finalize a historic deal. He tried to explain about the documents, the robbery, the billions of dollars at stake. Every word had hit a wall she couldn't hear past, bouncing back meaningless. He pulled out a paper covered in official stamps and numbers, unfolding it with shaking hands and showing it to her with desperate hope in his eyes. She thought it was old identification. Something from his past, maybe a visa or work permit. She had no idea she was looking at authorization codes for a $2.8 billion infrastructure agreement between two nations. The next morning, she brought breakfast again. Chai, samosas, a banana. And the morning after that. And the one after that. By the end of the first week, it had become a routine she couldn't imagine breaking, woven into the fabric of her morning as naturally as checking her email. 7 a.m., every single day without exception. Rodman was always there, always waiting at the same bench with that same weathered bag clutched to his chest like a lifeline. He never let it go. Not once. Not even to eat. They couldn't speak each other's language, but they communicated through gestures, through smiles, through the simple act of showing up. She would hand him the bag. He would press his palms together. She would nod. He would gesture as if telling elaborate stories she couldn't understand, pointing at his bag, at the skyscrapers around them, at her, at himself, a pantomime of something urgent and important. Sometimes she'd sit with him for a few minutes before heading to her office, ignoring the stares from other commuters. He'd gesture wildly, his hands painting pictures in the air, telling elaborate stories in Hindi and Punjabi. His face would light up as he spoke, animated and passionate. He'd point at the financial district buildings, mime signing documents, gesture toward her as if offering her something valuable. She thought he was reminiscing about a past life, maybe a job he'd once had, creating stories to maintain dignity. He was actually explaining his position as Chief Investment Officer, describing the infrastructure deal in meticulous detail, promising to repay her kindness 1,000 times over. The language barrier hid everything. Every promise. Every warning. Every truth. Subscribe to see the moment when everything finally came to light. You won't believe what happened next. On a freezing December morning, 6 weeks after their first meeting, Malia arrived at 7 a.m. as usual to find Rodman unconscious on the bench. His breathing was shallow and labored, his face gray with fever. The chai she'd brought the day before sat untouched beside him, frozen solid. She immediately called 911, her hands shaking as she gave the address, then knelt beside him on the cold concrete, refusing to leave his side. She held his hand while they waited, feeling how cold his skin was, how weak his pulse felt. At the hospital, as doctors worked frantically to stabilize him, a bilingual nurse happened to pass by his room and heard his feverish mumblings. She stopped dead in the doorway, her face going pale. "He's reciting bank routing numbers," she whispered to the attending physician. "And government security codes. Account numbers. Authorization sequences. This man isn't who we thought he was." The nurse called for the hospital administrator immediately. Within minutes, they were making urgent calls, voices hushed and tense. First to the Indian consulate. Then to the State Department. Then to Homeland Security. Malia stood in the hallway, confused and frightened, watching as official after official arrived with increasing urgency and seriousness. Men in suits. Women with federal badges. People speaking rapidly into phones. "What's happening?" she demanded, grabbing a consulate official by the arm. "Who is he?" The official turned to her, his face grave with the weight of international implications. "Ma'am, we've been searching for this man for 6 weeks. His disappearance has threatened international relations between two countries. Where did you find him?" Within hours, Malia's hospital waiting room filled with officials from the Indian consulate and U.S. State Department, transforming the sterile space into something resembling a diplomatic crisis center. They explained the impossible, each revelation more shocking than the last. Rodman Wood was the former chief investment officer of India's largest sovereign wealth fund, one of the most powerful financial positions in the country. He'd been traveling to New York to finalize a $2.8 billion infrastructure deal, roads, ports, renewable energy projects that would benefit both nations for decades. He'd been robbed on his way from the airport, stripped of his phone, wallet, and identification, but somehow managing to protect the leather bag containing the crucial documents. For 6 weeks, two governments had searched desperately for him: intelligence agencies, diplomatic channels, private investigators, while he sat invisible on a Manhattan bench 3 blocks from Wall Street, unable to communicate his identity, abandoned by a city too busy to stop and truly see him. The documents in his bag, an official explained, carefully opening the weathered leather case Malia had seen Rodman clutch every single morning. "These are the original signed contracts. Without them, the deal was dead. We couldn't move forward without the original authorization codes. Diplomatic relations were collapsing. The Indian government thought we'd detained him. We thought they'd recalled him. Intelligence agencies assumed kidnapping, ransom demands, an international incident. The financial markets were getting nervous. Billions were at stake." Malia stared at the papers inside, official seals, signatures, dense legal text in multiple languages. The same papers Rodman had tried to show her dozens of times, pulling them out with shaking hands, pointing desperately at numbers and stamps she dismissed as memories of bureaucratic past. "He tried to tell me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Every single morning, he tried to tell me who he was." This is where the story takes an incredible turn. Subscribe to see how Malia's kindness was rewarded beyond imagination. 3 weeks later, Rodman, now fully recovered, properly dressed, and with professional translators present, met Malia in a private conference room at Carter Technologies. He looked completely different, clean-shaven, wearing an expensive suit, his bearing dignified and commanding. But his eyes held the same warmth she'd seen on that bench every morning. "For 6 weeks, I tried to tell you who I was," he said through the interpreter, his voice thick with emotion. "Every morning, I explained my position, showed you the documents, promised I would repay your kindness 1,000 times over. I told you about the billions at stake, the deal I was carrying, the future I could offer you. But you fed me anyway, not because you understood what I could give you, not for any reward or recognition, but simply because you saw my humanity when the entire world had made me invisible." He slid documents across the polished conference table, partnership agreements granting her exclusive access to the infrastructure deal, investment opportunities in emerging Indian markets that weren't available to other American investors, introductions to the most powerful business leaders in South Asia. Within 8 weeks, the translator continued as Rodman spoke, "Your net worth will triple. From $1.2 billion to $3.7 billion. But that is not my greatest gift to you." He placed another document on the table, a check for $50 million made out to a foundation that didn't exist yet. "The Dignity First Foundation," he said, his eyes bright with emotion and purpose. "You gave me food when I was hungry. You saw me when I was invisible. Now we create a system that sees everyone: housing, translation services, medical care, and job placement for homeless immigrants. For people like me who are lost in a foreign country, unable to communicate, forgotten by systems that were supposed to protect them. Rodman reached across the table and took her hands in his. This is your true wealth, Malia. Not the billions in your accounts, but the dignity you gave to someone the world had discarded. 6 months later, Malia stood before the bench where she'd first met Rodman on that cold November morning that seemed like a lifetime ago. A bronze plaque had been installed on the backrest, its words simple but powerful: "Here compassion changed everything." The city had agreed to preserve the bench as a small monument, a reminder that extraordinary things could happen in ordinary places when someone chose to stop and see. She placed a cup of chai and a bag of samosas on the bench, honoring their morning ritual one more time. The chai steamed in the cool spring air, creating small clouds that drifted away on the breeze. Across the street, she watched a young professional in a sharp suit stop to help an elderly woman with her bags, holding the door of a building open and making sure she got inside safely. Small acts of kindness rippling outward like stones dropped in still water. Some changed individual lives. Some changed entire systems. All of them mattered in ways you couldn't always measure. Rodman stood beside her, no longer homeless, no longer invisible, his presence commanding respect from everyone who passed. But he was forever changed by the woman who stopped when everyone else walked past, who saw humanity where others saw only inconvenience. "You know what the irony is," he said quietly, speaking English now after months of intensive study. "I spent my entire career moving billions of dollars across international borders. I've negotiated deals that shaped economies, influenced governments, created opportunities for millions of people. But the most valuable transaction of my life, the one that mattered most, cost you maybe $5 a day for 6 weeks." Malia smiled, feeling the weight of the past 6 months, the foundation they'd built together, the thousands of lives already touched by their work. "Best investment I ever made." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the morning commuters rush past the bench, most with earbuds in and eyes on phones. Most didn't notice the plaque. Most didn't stop to read it. But one young man paused, read the inscription carefully, and then looked around as if seeing the street differently for the first time. He noticed an elderly person struggling with groceries and moved to help. That was enough. Change didn't happen all at once in dramatic gestures. It happened one person at a time. One morning at a time. One act of compassion at a time. The Dignity First Foundation had helped 800 people in 6 months. 800 invisible people who were now seen, housed, employed, connected. But more than that, it had started conversations, shifted perspectives, reminded people that everyone has a story you cannot see. Subscribe if this story moved you. Share it if you believe kindness still matters. The world needs more people who stop to see what everyone else ignores.